The universe stretches beyond every horizon we dare to imagine, and yet we ask, where does the infinite keep its heart? Perhaps the question itself is the doorway we've been searching for all along. People often ask me where God might dwell in a cosmos that knows no boundaries. They seem to believe that infinity must have an address, a throne room tucked somewhere between the galaxies. But I wonder if we're looking at it backwards, searching for a location when perhaps we should be asking about presence itself. Consider for a moment what it means to say the universe has no end. We speak these words so casually, as if our minds can truly hold such a concept. But infinity is not merely a very large number. It is not distance stretched beyond measure. It is something altogether different, a quality that dissolves the very notion of where. When I sit in my study late at night, surrounded by equations that describe the curvature of spacetime, I'm struck by a curious thought. We have built our understanding of God on the architecture of our limited perception. We imagine boundaries because we ourselves are bounded. We ask where, because we exist in a where. But what if the divine, like the universe itself, transcends the question? The child asks where the sky ends, and we smile at the innocence of the question. Yet we carry this same innocence into adulthood, asking where the infinite begins and ends, asking where God might sit in the cosmic theater. Perhaps the answer is not a place at all, but a recognition that in a universe without edges, presence need not be localized to be real. I think of the force we call gravity. It is everywhere, always, invisible yet undeniable. It does not live in any particular corner of space. It simply is, woven into the fabric of existence itself. Tell me, would it make sense to ask where gravity lives? Or would we understand that it pervades all things, that its presence is the relationship between masses, between energy, between the very structure of reality? This is not to reduce the divine to physics, far from it. It is to suggest that we may have been asking the wrong kind of question. The universe, in its boundlessness, offers us a different way of thinking about existence. Not as a collection of separated objects in space, but as a unified field of being. When I look at the night sky, I see light that has traveled millions of years to reach my eyes. I am looking at the past, at stars that may no longer exist, yet their light touches me now. Time and space weave together in ways that defy our everyday intuition. In such a universe, the question of where anything truly is becomes beautifully complex. Perhaps God, if we must use that word, is not in the universe the way a book sits on a shelf. Perhaps the relationship is more intimate than that, like the way music exists in the violin, not as a separate thing occupying space inside the wood, but as a possibility, a potential that becomes real only in the playing. I have spent my life studying the laws that govern matter and energy, and I have found them to be elegant beyond words. There is a harmony to it all, a mathematical beauty that suggests something profound. Whether you call that something God, or nature, or the mystery, it seems to me that it is not separate from the universe, but expressed through it, as a thought is expressed through words. The question, where does God live, assumes that God is a resident, and the universe is a residence. But what if we have it backwards? What if the universe itself is not a container, but an expression, not a stage where the play unfolds, but the play itself, with all its wonder and terror, beauty and mathematics, consciousness and mystery woven inseparably together? I don't claim to have answers. I'm suspicious of anyone who does. But I have learned to live with questions, to hold them gently, to let them teach me humility. And this much seems clear to me. In an endless universe, the search for location may be less meaningful than the recognition of presence. The same force that holds the planets in their orbits pulses in your chest as a heartbeat. The same atoms that formed in dying stars billions of years ago now make up your hands, your eyes, the neurons firing as you listen to these words. You are not in the universe, you are of it. We all are. So where does God live in an endless universe? Perhaps everywhere, perhaps nowhere. Perhaps the question dissolves when we realize that we are not separate observers looking at existence from the outside, but participants in it, expressions of it, briefly conscious portions of the whole, asking questions about itself. This doesn't diminish the sacred, it expands it beyond the walls of any temple to include the temples themselves and the ground they stand on, and the space between the stars. If there is divinity, it is not located somewhere else, waiting to be found. It is here now in the asking itself. I have no proof of this. Science can measure and predict, but it cannot answer every hunger of the human heart. Still, when I look at the equations, when I see how energy and matter dance together, how time bends, how everything connects to everything else, in ways we're only beginning to understand, I feel something like reverence. Call it what you will. But know this, you are standing in it. We all are. The question is not where the infinite keeps its heart, but whether we have the courage to recognize that we ourselves are heartbeats within it. And that, I think, is the most mind-blowing answer of all. The question itself may be wrong. Einstein suggests we're asking the wrong type of question by seeking a physical location for God in an infinite universe. The concept of where may not apply to the infinite or the divine. They tell me I should have answers. After all, I have spent decades with equations, with thought experiments, with the patient unraveling of how light bends and time stretches. Surely, they say, a man who can describe the curvature of space-time should be able to point to a map and say, there, that is where God resides. But this is precisely where I must disappoint them, and perhaps in that disappointment lies something more valuable than any answer I could provide. You see, we are creatures of habit, and our most persistent habit is asking questions in the only language we know. A child who has only ever seen rectangles will try to fit the circle into a rectangular frame. It is not stubbornness, it is simply the limit of available tools. And so we ask where, because we live in a world of wheres. The cup is on the table, the moon is in the sky, my study is in Princeton. Everything we encounter from the moment we wake has a location, an address in the great registry of space. But what happens when we reach beyond our immediate surroundings? What happens when we try to apply this same reasoning to the universe itself, and to whatever we imagine might transcend it? I think this is where we stumble, not because we lack intelligence, but because we are wielding the wrong instrument. It is like trying to measure love with a ruler, or weigh a memory on a scale. The tool and the task are mismatched. Consider the question itself, where does God live? Already, embedded in those 5 words, are assumptions we have not examined. The word where assumes location. The word live suggests residence, occupation, a being situated in space, as we are situated. The word does implies present tense, a continuing state that exists in time. Each of these words carries the fingerprints of our human experience, our bounded, temporal, spatial way of existing. And we take these fingerprints and press them onto the infinite, expecting a clear impression. But infinity is not patient with our assumptions. I learned this long ago, when I first began to truly grapple with what it means for the universe to have no edge. As a young man, I would lie awake imagining it, traveling faster and faster in a straight line, never finding a wall, never reaching a boundary. Where would I be then? Still in the universe, of course. And if I continued? Still in the universe. The mind rebels against this. Surely there must be an end, and beyond that end, something else. But this rebellion is only the complaint of a consciousness that evolved on the surface of a small planet, where everything has edges, where every field has a fence. What I came to understand, slowly and with great difficulty, is that the universe does not owe us the courtesy of matching our intuitions. It is under no obligation to make sense in the terms we learned as children. And if this is true of physical space, which we can at least measure and observe, how much more true must it be of questions about the divine, about ultimate meaning, about the ground of being itself? When someone asks me where God lives, I want to ask them in return, what do you mean by where? Do you mean a location in 3-dimensional space? But we already know that space itself curves, that it is bound up with time in ways that make the simple notion of place much more complicated than it first appears. Do you mean somewhere outside the universe? But if the universe is all that physically exists, what could outside possibly mean? It is like asking what is north of the North Pole. The question uses valid words, but they cancel each other out, leaving us with grammatical nonsense dressed up as profundity. I do not say this to be difficult, or to dodge the question. I say it because I think we gain more by recognizing the limits of our questions than by forcing answers into shapes they cannot hold. There is a certain kind of courage required here. The courage to say I don't know, not as a failure, but as an honest assessment. And beyond that, the deeper courage to say perhaps this question, as I have asked it, does not point toward truth. This is not relativism or evasion. It is precision. When a physicist sees an equation that produces nonsense, dividing by zero perhaps or predicting infinite energy, we do not shrug and say all equations are equally meaningless. We say, this equation is being misapplied, or it breaks down under these conditions, or we need a new framework. The mathematics itself is honest. It tells us when we have wandered into territory where our models no longer work. Language should be held to the same standard. When our language produces questions that dissolve upon examination, we should not force them into coherence. We should recognize that we have reached the boundary of what these particular words can carry. But here is where it becomes interesting, where science and something like spirituality might shake hands across a divide we imagined was unbridgeable. Because in recognizing that where does God live may be a malformed question, we have not diminished the mystery. We have deepened it. We have acknowledged that the divine, if it exists, is not simply a very powerful being who happens to live very far away. That would be too small, too tidy. It would be God as a cosmic emperor, seated on a throne at the edge of everything, and we could perhaps send him letters if only we knew the address. No, what we brush up against is something stranger and more difficult. We brush up against the possibility that our entire framework, location, residence, spatial containment, is a category error when applied to ultimate things. Not because those things are imaginary, but because they are not things in the way we usually mean that word. I think of my work on relativity, how difficult it was for people to accept at first, not because the mathematics was beyond them. Many brilliant minds could follow the equations, but because it violated intuition, time that changes speed depending on motion, space that bends. These seemed like tricks, like paradoxes invented to confuse, but they were not tricks. They were descriptions of how reality actually behaves once you look carefully enough, once you stop insisting that the universe conform to the common sense built from a lifetime of slow-moving experience on a relatively flat planet. Perhaps something similar is true here. Perhaps our common sense about God, built from centuries of thinking about kings and kingdoms, fathers and thrones, places and dwellings, is simply the wrong model. Not because there is no mystery at the heart of existence. I have never doubted that there is something profound and beautiful woven into the fabric of reality, but because we have been trying to locate that mystery as if it were a landmark on a map. What if instead, presence over location, like gravity, which pervades everything without residing in a specific place, divine presence might be woven into the fabric of reality itself, rather than occupying a particular spot in space? There is a force that holds you to the earth right now, at this very moment, as you listen to these words. It is invisible. You cannot see it, cannot touch it, cannot bottle it or put it on a shelf. And yet it is more real than the chair beneath you, more constant than the ground under your feet. We call it gravity, and it is everywhere at once. When I ask people where gravity lives, they look at me as though I have asked a foolish question. And perhaps it is foolish, but not in the way they think. It is foolish because the question itself misunderstands what gravity is. Gravity does not live anywhere. It is not a resident of space. It simply is, woven into the relationship between masses, between energy, between the very geometry of existence itself. You cannot point to a place and say, there, that is where gravity keeps its home. It pervades all things. It is the field, not the object within the field. Now, why do I speak of gravity when we are meant to be discussing something far grander, far more mysterious? Because I think gravity offers us a clue, a way of thinking that might free us from the trap of always asking where. We are so accustomed to things having locations. The book is on the table, the star is in the sky, even our thoughts we imagine are somewhere, tucked inside our skulls, residing in the grey matter of the brain. But gravity teaches us that presence does not require location in the way we usually imagine it. The Earth pulls on the moon, and the moon pulls on the Earth. They are separated by vast distances, and yet they are not separate. They are bound together by something that occupies no space, that travels at no speed through the medium, that simply is the relationship between them. When I worked out the equations describing this, I saw that gravity is not a force being transmitted from one place to another. It is the curvature of space-time itself. The moon moves the way it does not because something is pulling on it from a distance, but because it is following the natural shape of the space it inhabits. This is not poetry, though it sounds like it. This is simply what happens when you look carefully at the world and refuse to let your preconceptions cloud what you see. And what you see is that the most fundamental aspects of reality do not obey the rules we constructed from our limited, everyday experience. So when we ask where God lives in an endless universe, perhaps we are making the same category error we would make if we asked where gravity lives. Perhaps we are trying to locate something that is not the kind of thing that has a location. Not because it doesn't exist. Gravity certainly exists, as anyone who has ever fallen can attest, but because existence itself is stranger and more subtle than the simple presence of objects in space. I think of presence now not as occupation, but as permeation. Not as a thing in a place, but as the field that makes place possible. The divine, if we must speak of it, might be less like a king in a castle and more like gravity itself. Invisible, everywhere. The very fabric of relationship that binds one thing to another, that curves space, that makes motion and meaning and connection possible at all. And if this is so, then the question shifts entirely. We are no longer searching for an address. We are recognizing that we have always been standing in universe as expression, not container. The universe isn't a residence where God lives separately. It may be an expression or manifestation of the divine. We're not separate observers but participants, made of the same cosmic material as stars. I have spent many hours in my life looking at containers, cups that hold water, boxes that hold books, rooms that hold people. It is natural, I suppose, to think of the world this way, as a series of vessels, each holding something within it. And so when we think of the universe, we imagine it too as a kind of container, a very large box, and somewhere inside this box, perhaps in a special corner, there sits God, residing like a tenant in an apartment. But what if we have it backwards? What if the universe is not a container at all? Let me tell you about something I discovered, though discovered is perhaps too grand a word. It was more like stumbling upon something that had been there all along, waiting patiently for someone to notice. When I worked out the relationship between energy and matter, I found they were not two different things awkwardly sharing the same space. They were the same thing, expressed in different forms. Matter is condensed energy. Energy is liberated matter. The equation is simple, perhaps too simple for how profound it is, but what it tells us is that the universe is not made of separate substances that happen to coexist. It is one unified field of being, constantly transforming, constantly expressing itself in different modes. Now, when you look at a wave in the ocean, you do not ask where the ocean lives inside the wave. The question would be absurd. The wave is not a container holding ocean water. The wave is the ocean, temporarily expressing itself in a particular form, rising and falling, but never separate from the whole. When the wave crashes on the shore and disappears, the ocean has not lost anything. It has simply changed the pattern of its expression. I think we must learn to see the universe this way, not as a stage where events unfold, but as the unfolding itself. Not as a container holding things, but as the activity of being, constantly creative, constantly present in every form it takes. The stars are not in the universe the way coins are in a purse. The stars are what the universe is doing in those particular locations, at those particular times. And if this is true of stars, might it not also be true of us? We speak as though we are visitors here, temporary residents in a universe that exists independently of us. We say we are in the universe as though we could, in principle, be somewhere else. But this is illusion born of language. You are not in the universe. You are of it. The atoms that make up your body were forged in the cores of dying stars billions of years ago. The oxygen you breathe was produced by ancient plants. The thoughts moving through your mind right now are electrochemical patterns matter and energy dancing together in the same unified field that dances everywhere else. There is no separation, except the useful fiction we maintain to navigate daily life. But useful fictions should not be mistaken for deep truths. The truth, as far as I can see it, is that we are temporary expressions of the whole, like waves on an ocean, like notes in a symphony. We rise, we express our particular pattern, and we return to the source. But the source never lost us because we never left. This changes everything about the question of where God lives. If the universe is not a container but an expression, then God is not a resident but, how shall I say this carefully, the expressing itself. Not a being who made the universe and then stepped back to watch it run, not a king in a palace somewhere beyond the galaxies, but the creative activity of existence, the ongoing miracle that there is something rather than nothing, that this something organizes itself into stars and planets and consciousness and music and mathematics. When I look at the night sky, I do not see objects arranged in empty space. I see light that has traveled unimaginable distances to reach my eye, collapsing the separation between there and here, between then and now. I see matter, organizing itself according to laws so elegant they make me weep. I see the universe looking at itself through my eyes, becoming conscious of its own beauty, asking questions about its own nature. And if I am the universe asking questions about itself, if you are too, if every conscious being is a place where the whole becomes aware of itself, then perhaps retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. The sacred is everywhere, or the question dissolves. In an endless universe, divinity isn't located somewhere else waiting to be found. It's present in the interconnectedness of all things, in the mathematical harmony of nature, and in our conscious participation in existence itself. When my daughter was young, she once asked me where her dreams lived. Did they stay in her head when she was awake? Were they hiding somewhere, waiting for night? I remember smiling at the question, not because it was childish, but because it was profound. She had stumbled onto something that philosophers have argued about for millennia, the nature of presence, of existence, of where things are when they are not immediately visible. I told her that dreams do not live anywhere, but that did not mean they were not real. They arise, I said, from the activity of her mind, the way music arises from the violin. When the music stops, we do not ask where it has gone. It has not gone anywhere. It has simply ceased to be expressed. And yet, the potential for that music remains in the violin, in the musician, in the relationship between bow and string, and the air that carries the sound to our ears. Now, many years later, I find myself thinking about that conversation when people ask me where God lives in an endless universe. Because I think the answer, if there is an answer, might be something like what I told my daughter, not somewhere else, not waiting to be found in some distant corner of space, but here, always here, woven into the fabric of what is. The sacred, you see, has been imprisoned by our imagination. We have built walls around it, placed it in temples and churches, confined it to holy books and designated hours. And I do not mean to diminish those things. They serve their purpose. They offer comfort and community and connection. But somewhere along the way, we began to believe that God was only in those places, only at those times. We made the divine into something separate, something distant, something that required pilgrimage to reach. But the universe itself is the pilgrimage. Every step you take is on holy ground, if only because it is ground at all, because there is something rather than nothing, because the laws that govern the falling apple also govern the motion of galaxies, and these laws are beautiful in a way that takes my breath away, even after a lifetime of study. I have spent years working with equations that describe how energy moves through space, how light bends around massive objects, how time itself is not the fixed, absolute thing we imagine, but something fluid, something relative. And what strikes me most forcefully is not the complexity of it all, though it is complex, but the unity. Everything connects to everything else. The same principles that operate at the scale of atoms also operate at the scale of stars. There is one mathematics, one set of relationships, one grand coherence that binds the smallest particle to the largest structure. This is not mysticism. This is observation. This is what happens when you look carefully at the world and refuse to divide it into artificial categories. And yet, it feels like mysticism, doesn't it? It feels like what the old sages were trying to tell us in their own language, with their own tools, that separation is illusion, that the many are expressions of the one, that divinity is not elsewhere but here, not later but now. When I watch a sunset, I am watching light that left the sun 8 minutes ago, traveling through the vacuum of space at a speed that nothing can exceed, striking molecules in the atmosphere and scattering in such a way that the sky turns colors that have inspired poets and painters for as long as there have been eyes to see. This is physics. This is measurable, predictable, understandable, and it is also miraculous. The two descriptions do not contradict each other. They complement each other, the way the particle nature of light complements its wave nature. Perhaps God is like that, not either here or there, not either immanent or transcendent, but somehow both, or neither, or something our categories cannot quite capture. What I can say with some confidence is this: if there is a divine presence, it is not hiding from us. It is not located in some inaccessible realm, waiting for us to discover the secret password or the hidden coordinates. It is in the fact that there are coordinates at all. It is in the mystery of existence itself, the sheer improbability that we are here, conscious, able to ask questions about our own origins, able to look at the stars and recognize that we are made of the same elements, that we are the universe examining itself. Every breath you take contains atoms that were once part of a star. Every thought you think is the universe thinking through you. The boundary between self and world is not as solid as it seems. We are porous, permeable, continuous with the whole, and if that is true, then the search for where the sacred resides becomes. Retri Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses by B. And so we arrive, not at an ending, but at a recognition. The question was, where does God live in an endless universe? And I have spent this time showing you that perhaps we have been asking the wrong kind of question entirely. But let me be clear now, in these final words, about what I truly believe you must carry with you. You are not separate from this universe. This is not philosophy, this is physics. The atoms in your body were forged in the hearts of dying stars. The oxygen you breathe was created by ancient organisms billions of years ago. The consciousness that allows you to understand these words is the universe becoming aware of itself. There is no boundary between you and the cosmos. You are a temporary pattern in an eternal dance, a wave on an infinite ocean. When you ask where God lives, you are asking where you live, not your address, not your body, but the awareness itself, the presence that experiences this moment. And that presence is everywhere, because consciousness is not contained by space any more than love is contained by the heart. It arises from the whole, like music from an instrument. The sacred is not hiding from you in some distant realm. It is here, in the fact that anything exists at all. It is in the mathematical beauty of natural law, in the improbable emergence of minds capable of wonder, in the connections that bind every particle to every other across the vast darkness of space. If the universe is infinite, then there is no elsewhere where God might dwell apart from it. There is only this endless, interconnected, mysteriously ordered reality of which you are an inseparable part. Do not forget this. You are not looking for God. You are the place where the looking happens. You are stardust that learned to think, matter that became conscious, the universe asking questions about itself. And that truth, once truly grasped, changes everything. That is where the infinite keeps its heart, not in location, but in you, in me, in every moment of awareness. That is the answer that dissolves the question.